Hey everybody, this is Brandon. I'm a summer member with Green Iowa AmeriCorps, and this is going to be a continuation of the GIA Endangered Species series. And today we're going to be covering one of America's most interesting birds and most endangered, the whooping crane. So the whooping crane is a very interesting bird. It's actually the largest bird in North America. It's standing around 5 feet 3 inches tall, so it is the height of an average human in a lot of instances. Um, As you can see, compared to many of these other waterfowl, it is significantly larger. In terms of identification, juvenile whooping cranes have this very nice cinnamon toast crunch kind of hue to their feathering. They stand about 3 feet tall, as you can see in the lower picture compared to the adults. And when they become adults, they develop this really beautiful crimson red cap. And as you can see on the beak, they also have this interesting orange ring, which is a very easy identifiable marker. But the two most identifiable markers are one, when they're in flight, the crisp white feathers that they have often contrast very nicely against the black tipped wings. And this is a very easy way to notice a whooping crane in flight. They are the only North American bird that has this attribute. But the most telling way to tell is, and often without even having to see them, is their call. Whooping cranes have a very, very distinct call, similar to a Canada goose. Hopefully you guys could hear that. But yeah, it's a very distinct call, significantly louder than a Canadian goose, and a little more wheezy. So to get into some history involving the whooping crane, in the early 1800s, whooping cranes were aplenty in North America. They were a very abundant bird species, the largest population being in Louisiana due to the climate. Louisiana and places like Florida, a lot of these marshy grasslands um, that are fairly warm in the south allow whooping cranes to live there year round as opposed to migrating. But like many other animal species in North America during the 1800s, or AKA during the American Industrial Revolution, whooping cranes were wiped out close to extinction due to two main factors, one of which being overhunting. Back in the day, hunting was a really big problem. There wasn't really any consideration towards conservation of a species, especially if it was hunted. It was just hunted as much as it could be. Um, there wasn't any real idea in terms of like, oh, maybe we should stop hunting them because there's none left. That wasn't really a thing. And then the other one, which is a very popular reasoning for low population numbers, is a loss in habitat. As I said, in the Industrial Revolution, America was also expanding westward. And with that expansion westward, populations grew and swelled. And with swelling populations in a modern society, you need more and more agriculture. So a lot of the grassy wetlands and grassy prairies that the whooping cranes called home were destroyed by agricultural intentions and also logging intentions. So with all the trees logged down and your grassy wetland turned into a cornfield, whooping cranes lost a majority of their habitat, and by 1940, only 13 remained in Louisiana, which is crazy to think was such a small number. Uh, with those 13 in Louisiana, as you can imagine, in the early 1940s, a tropical storm hit Louisiana and managed to wipe out almost all of the whooping cranes, almost causing them to go entirely extinct. But they had two survivors, most importantly of which was a whooping crane that they then named Josephine. Housed at the Audubon Zoo in Louisiana, Josephine was the first captive whooping crane. She lived to be 24 years old. She was also the first whooping crane to reproduce in captivity. She had many, many offspring, sadly, of which, though, none of the offspring actually reproduced. So Josephine's genetic line, being the last Louisiana whooping crane, ended in the 1970s. And that's when the Louisiana whooping crane became extinct. But that's not the only whooping crane. So we still have them. They aren't completely extinct like the dodo. Um, Whooping cranes are actually bred primarily in Texas, but also in other places like Louisiana still, and places like Wisconsin and Florida. Breeding whooping cranes is a very interesting process. It involves leaving them in these large pens in the marshes during their juvenile age. And as you can see in both of these pictures, the humans that attend to the whooping cranes wear these really weird kind of like plague doctor outfits. They're covered in white, and their hands are supposed to act as a mimic head for a whooping crane mother. And as you might expect, the goal of this is to basically avoid any contact with humans. They don't want the juvenile whooping cranes to develop any dependencies on humans. They want them to be as wild as they possibly can be, even though they're being raised in captivity. You might be able to see in the left picture, but I might as well bring it up. They also, as you can see, tag the juvenile whooping cranes with these little ankle bracelets that are of different colors, and depending on the ordering of the colors, they can tell when that juvenile was born, what part of the flock he is, and how old he is, and stuff like that. A really famous case in terms of breeding whooping cranes happened in the early 1970s. When the former leading expert George Archibald, he's the world-renowned whooping crane expert, had a, oh, that's actually wrong. This is Josephine. I meant for that to say Tex. He undertook a what was thought to be impossible undertaking, where a female whooping crane named Tex was infertile for 10 years, and by that I mean she just wasn't reproducing with any of the males. So George Archibald managed to befriend Tex, and over the course of a decade, he managed to eventually gain her trust. And then after that, they managed to artificially inseminate Tex, and then she actually did produce offspring. It's probably one of the biggest success stories in terms of whooping crane breeding, that they could actually coax a whooping crane into being artificially inseminated. Tex has a very large long lineage now. Her most famous offspring was her first offspring, nicknamed G Wiz. He's lived to be 30 years old, and yeah, there's a lot of wood buffalo Aransas whooping cranes that can trace their lineage back to this exact bird. Near the end of the breeding process, it's primarily done in the Necedah National Wildlife Refuge in Wisconsin. But the juvenile whooping cranes, once they've gotten their wings, they can then proceed to do their first mock migratory flock, flying down to Florida. As you can see, through the process of using a propeller glider, a scientist takes many different trips down to Wisconsin, or down to Florida from Wisconsin, to kind of train the juvenile whooping cranes in the process of migrating. This is supposed to act like the mother whooping crane, and it's supposed to mimic what they would be doing in the wild. And this actually does work, and it does help significantly, and it's a very time-consuming process in the breeding of whooping cranes. Also in the top right, I just wanted to, I like to collect stamps, so I thought that was a pretty cool whooping crane stamp, and I'm sure some of these national wildlife refugees are part of the reason as to why that stamp exists. And then just to kind of finish off with, just to give an idea of scale, there's around 800 whooping cranes currently on the planet Earth in North America. The largest population and the most popular and well-known population is the Aransas wood buffalo flock, which is a migratory flock. As I said earlier, they migrate from northern Canada in Wood Buffalo National Park down to southern Texas, touching the Gulf of Mexico in Aransas. The next biggest flock is the Wisconsin to Florida flock. They flock from White River Marsh, Wisconsin, down to St. Marks, Florida. This is the one where the propeller gliders are used to kind of create a mock migration. And then two newer ones. The Florida one is extremely new, but they also have a White Lake, Louisiana flock, which is non-migratory, As I said earlier, Louisiana, Florida, a lot of these southern states that have these marshy, kind of mangrovey wetlands near their south provide a perfect spot for whooping cranes to live in a non-migratory manner. So White Lake, Louisiana has slowly started to be home to a non-migratory flock that's around 69 strong. They brought it back, and I believe they brought them from the Aransas buffalo flock, and they have been slowly increasing in number. And then the Kissimmee Prairie, Florida flock is the newest of them all, a very small flock of 9 to 15 whooping cranes, and that one is also non-migratory. As you might see, they're all fairly close, but none of these flocks actually mingle to prevent disease spread, because as you can imagine, with only 800 birds in the world, it'd be very, very easy for a disease to, say, spread from the Aransas buffalo flock to the Wisconsin flock or the Louisiana flock. And then we're talking a near extinction event for the whooping crane. But thank you for hearing my talk. And that is a little bit of info on the whooping crane. I hope you are interested in learning more. And I appreciate your time listening. Thank you.